Well, good morning to the business show. I'm Janet Harvey. Yay, thank you. To my neighbors who had listened to me for 7 hours yesterday, and they're going to get to listen to me again for 7 hours today, assuming my voice continues. As I said, I'm Janet Harvey, and I am the founder and CEO of Invite Change. We are a global human development organization. I've had the great privilege to be an entrepreneur since 1996. Working on all 6 continents in companies of all shapes and sizes. And our work has always been about helping individuals come back home to themselves and to remember they are so much more than any one situation or experience in their life. So much more that's to come. If you want to up-level your team, the secret to doing that is to up-level yourself first. In today's talk, we're going to explore a little bit about what gets in the way of leaders being able to scale in their organizations. It's what they're all hungry for, to create this opportunity to grow an organization, to employ more people, to have more impact in the world, to fulfill a big high purpose, whatever it is that calls you. It all starts within each of us first, as a human, and then in our application to leadership. So let's take a look at our roadmap. As you can see on the side, the way we show up makes a huge difference to the energy and the commitment and the loyalty that you develop in your team. You know, everybody says to me, culture is so important, but why is it so elusive? And I said, because you cannot manage it and control it. Culture is like a marketing brand, a reflection of the experience that people have with you, you individually, and your organization collectively, the way your work manifests inside of any location, any touch point that a consumer would experience. You're always exuding your culture. This is why it's so dangerous to not be deliberate about it and to recognize that every choice we make, the tone of our voice, the pace of our speaking, whether we make eye contact or not, our ability to be open in our exchange and attention with other people makes a tremendous difference on whether we're perceived as credible, whether our work is really going to land and meet somebody's needs. We don't even get permission to ask the question, what is it you might be seeking? What might I contribute to your well-being and success? We don't get to ask those questions without our authenticity in the way that we show up. So I'm going to work a little bit today on what is it that gets in the way? What are the kinds of habits, thinking habits and action habits that work in cross-purpose to the thing we care most about, which is to ignite and invite people to step in and take advantage of whatever it is we're bringing to the world. So there is a diagram here. We're going to break this down as we go today. But I'm going to go ahead and put it up and give you a little bit of insight about what it's talking about. In the center here, you see 4 key skills. How many of you think you're really good at curiosity, asking questions? Yes, most of us do. But now think about the last few questions you've asked. Did they start with, is there, do you, have you, will you? You'll notice that question is only going to evoke a yes or a no, or maybe a maybe. You're not going to learn anything about the other person with a question like that. That's called a closed question. But if you're curious in a generative way, your purpose with the question is to listen to learn. Fundamentally, being generative in the world requires asking before telling so that you can listen to learn. Now, you probably also think you're really good at listening. I had been on the planet a pretty long time, and active listening's been around the entire time. And I think everybody's had some introduction to it. But here's the problem. Most people listen to figure out how they can respond, as opposed to being available to fully receive what somebody is expressing. And guess what? The other person always knows, whether or not you are genuinely interested in what they have to say. They can feel it when it's disingenuous and you've lost connection. There won't be a follow-up conversation when we listen in that way. So there is much to learn here. But today I'm going to look at the top two, which are far less familiar to people. Understanding how do we open up the space for an exchange with another human being. I'm going to tell you a little story. I work a lot in organizations that have distributed centers, and this one is about a warehouse where there are about 2 miles of concrete where everybody works, and they are putting together orders to ship out to customers. This organization was getting ready to put a labor management system in place, and they were very concerned that the frontline supervisors would be inspecting data and being very compliance oriented as opposed to engaging the workforce to have them initiate continuous improvement ideas. Certainly far better. So I was on site for a few days, being a mystery shopper, maybe that's a familiar term to you, and I'm watching the conversations that are happening on the floor. And the next thing I know, I watched a repeat conversation. There's a guy with oops, can't go that close. There was a guy with a clipboard underneath his arm. He's walking down the concrete floor of the warehouse, and out of his left side, he never turns his head. He hears, "Hey boss, can I get 2 minutes with you?" He never looks up and says, "Sure, walk with me. I'm on my way to a meeting that I'm late for." And they keep walking, and this guy's trying to catch up with him to tell him what he wants to ask. And the moral to the story is the guy finally gave up. There was no connectivity between his supervisor and him, and he finally said, "Never mind, I'll just try to find you later." Now, there's a lot going on in that very simple interaction. If we think about it from the leader's point of view, he's distracted. His eye is on what the next meeting is going to be and what he needs to contribute. He is in no way giving respect to the person who has a question for him. I watched this repeat many times, so what I also know is he operates this way. So the only way the employee can actually get his attention is when he's walking on the floor to go do something else. So now he's signaled disrespect. He's signaled disinterest in what that person is working on. And ultimately what happens is you have a disengaged, unproductive employee who is underperforming to potential. That supervisor has no idea what that employee is capable of doing. If he was operating in a more generative way and he was doing open exchange, he would have stopped and turned and spoken to that individual. And he would have invited that individual to say what it was they wanted from the conversation. What would happen at the end of our 2 minutes that's useful to you? Which says, I care about what you're working on. I care about what you need right now in order to make forward progress. Tell me how to be useful to you. I'm respecting them. Mutually, we agree there's something useful for this conversation. Even if it is, you know what, boss, it's more than a 2-minute conversation. It's a 5-minute conversation. I'm going to catch you later this afternoon, but I knew I needed to grab you now to say, can I see you at 3 o'clock? Great. I'll see you at 3 in my office. Now the manager can go off to his meeting undistracted, and that employee knows I got his attention, he respected my need for his information, and we've got a commitment to see each other again. That's open exchange and open attention. And in our crazy, chaotic world, we are not doing this. This is why leaders are looking at me and saying, why is engagement at 21%? Meaning only 21% of the workforce is actively engaged. We should all be embarrassed as leaders that this is happening. Society for Human Resource Management has reported on incivility starting in 2024. We just got the Q1 numbers, and it's worse than we thought. 49.7% of respondents said, I see or personally experience an act of incivility every single day. If you look across the United States, that's 280 million acts of incivility every hour. It's costed the US economy in 2024 almost $3 trillion. That's a big number. But I gotta tell you, I talk to leaders all the time who look at that and say that to me. That's a big number, and they change nothing. That's why I'm doing this talk. So that you have an opportunity to understand as a leader that there are some things we do unconsciously that are contributing to what I think is an engagement and an incivility epidemic. But it's solvable. And it's solvable by the 4 words on the outside of the ring: whole, resourceful, capable, and creative. And good morning. Those sound like very simple words. They are, but we underestimate the power of them. Think about the last time you went into an all-team meeting. You had everybody that works for you there. What was your mindset as you walked into that meeting? Were you taking a little bit of an inventory? You've maybe looked at the status reports and you know John's behind schedule and Susie's got 3 problems she can't solve that we're going to have to talk about in this meeting. These 2 guys over here, I don't know what they've been doing all week, but they certainly aren't being productive, right? You can hear the inventory because we're in a hurry. We need to get that stuff solved and get people productive again. But this is the mistake. If instead I say to myself, what's happened in the last week that's worthy of celebrating? Where am I seeing behaviors that we know are the secret to us being productive? Who's worthy of an acknowledgement? What might we talk about that helps everybody understand that we're making progress? That's a mindset that says, this team, I recruited, I selected, I onboarded, I got trained, I got them assigned in the right seat. So right seat on the bus, you might remember that phrase from Mr. Collins. Let me make sure that the goal is big enough and it's understood as a shared purpose for them to step into and grow. If I'm not thinking that they're ready and capable of growing, we're not going to. And this is the key. Like, all leaders want to scale and grow. I get it. Well, that's up to us and how we show up. So I'm going to come back to this, but this is the generative mindset. And this is, if you take nothing else away from this 45 minutes, take away what it would require of you to believe that your team is more capable than you're seeing. And shift the way you engage with them. So why does fixing the team start with the team members' mirror? So you can see the points on the slide for yourself. But maybe you've had this experience where you got very excited about a meeting you were planning. You've practiced your talking points. You know exactly how it's going to land. You're sure your team is going to be super excited about this new initiative. And you speak for 5 minutes and then ask, does anybody have any questions? And nobody says anything. Had that experience? Yeah. Not a very generative approach. The alternative, of course, would be to open with some kind of a question that gets everybody's voice in the room activated and paying attention. And then to say, today, instead of our regular team meeting, I want to talk about a very exciting new initiative that I just learned about that our organization is going to be rolling out over the next 10 months. You're in the early going of hearing about it, and I want us to do some brainstorming to figure out how do we get ready. Now, what has that leader just done? I've set the stage. I've said, I respect you enough to bring you along. I'm inviting you to help shape it. This is what employees are looking for. Self-determination theory, which really came out in the 70s, built on the backs of something Carl Rogers said in the 60s about humans innately want to grow and achieve. It's just in our DNA. In the same way that staying connected human to human is also part of our DNA. Leaders that remember these 2 things are always going to have higher loyalty and commitment. So essentially what we're talking about here is that if your team is non-responsive, that's on us as leaders. We need to look in the mirror ourselves and begin to understand the way in which we're inviting engagement is the reason why we're not getting engagement. I know that sounds a little paradoxical, but truly, if the invitation doesn't feel respectful, that you recognize my competency, and ultimately that you give me authority to act, I'm never going to get to belonging. And that's ultimately where motivation comes. I am valued here, and there is a place for me to grow into. Now again, just like the data that I've said to leaders, I also tell them about the theory, and they still look at me and say, but what are you going to do to fix it? And I have said to many a leader, it has nothing to do with your team, and it has everything to do with who you're being as a leader. And this is why, in my opinion, when coaching started to get formalized in the world, which happened in the early 90s, it has exploded on the scene. And We went from the original 30 members that built the International Coaching Federation. In fact, the South Florida chapter is at booth 622 if you want to go see them. And we're now 65,000 strong of credentialed coaches working on 155 cities around the world. It's a drop in the bucket to 8 billion people. We all have a lot to learn. I still have people who come up to me and say, "What do you do for a living?" And I say, "I'm a professional coach." And they go, "What do you coach?" And I say, "Humans." "What do you mean you coach humans?" And I said, "Humans being better humans together?" "Oh, you mean like in an organization?" Well, what else would I mean? Right? So we just don't have awareness that actually we have a lot of choice around how we show up in the world. It makes a huge impact when we do it unconsciously and when we do it consciously. And the unconscious is in the data. The consciously will also be in the data, but it starts with our own mindset shift. So when you look at this here as the generative mindset, what is it that would get in the way of you believing that your team was whole, resourceful, capable, and creative? I'm not asking you to be vulnerable and answer the question, but I want you to really bring to mind a situation. Maybe you've got somebody on your team that is not living up to their potential as you understand it. Ask yourself, when is the last time you had a conversation with them, not about what they didn't get done, but about what they're passionate about? What's the reason they're in our organization in the first place? Have they recently thought about the purpose of the organization? And are they making a connection between what their skills and interests are with that purpose? This is particularly important for those of you that have Gen Z and Alpha workforce. They will not go to work for you if you are not consistently drawing attention to the connection between their work and the purpose of the company. That's not so true in my generation. It was much more about, I want a relationship with the boss. And then kind of the middle generation said, and I want cool people to work with. Now what we have is, you better be doing something cool in the world, and then I want cool people to work with, and yeah, I guess I better have a good relationship with my boss. But it's still the same three. It's just a little different orientation to priority. Who sets the tone for all three of those things? It's the leader. So much of our work is learning how to notice how our team is responding and to be more deliberate and anticipating about how we're creating the environment for them. So let's figure out why we don't do it. I brought out this book, which if you stick around till the end, you can get a signed copy. Some lucky person will do it. We have habits that are unconscious. Our human body prefers habit and preference and bias because it's an energy conservation. And that part of the body is always paying attention to whether or not the environment is safe. So we build up filters that keep us from seeing what's actually occurring. So our bodies seem like they might work against us, but it's not always so. Maybe you bought a red car recently and because you thought nobody had red cars. But then on the way home from the dealership, you saw red cars everywhere. That's the part of the human body that builds those filters. It's called the reticular activating system, for those of you who want to know the science. So that means that when we want to change, we have to tell ourselves, I'm going to turn off my autopilot switch. And instead, I'm going to be a little slower and a little more thoughtful. What's the best choice for me now? What's the best choice for us now? It's not just a solo journey, right? If you're a leader, you've got a group of people, which might be 2, or it might be 20, or it might be 200. As the stakes go up because your scale goes up, you have to be even more deliberate. And why don't we? You can see that habit has us limit what we pay attention to. And as a result, it's super important that we say to ourselves, what can I learn new here? What's changed in the environment that asks of me to think more critically about what the ripple effect will be of this decision? But we don't do it because of the second reason. Speed. Haven't we gotten addicted to speed at work? How much faster can you do it? But here's the problem. If we're not allowing ourselves to recognize that the environment has changed, so that's habit number 1, we're missing information. It might be us missing it, of course, but even more important, we're not the only smart person in the room. We just hired a bunch of smart people Do we stop and ask them, how do they see the environment? Unfortunately, this second habit is the reason we don't. And then we get 30 days from implementation and somebody says, oops, you guys skipped a few things. We need to delay rollout. Do you know how much that costs? Let me tell you about a company that had a $35 million deal on the table. They were investing in partially in an acquisition and partially they were doing a build out. And there had been problem after problem surfaced by people on the project team that the leader said, it's okay, we'll solve it when we get there. And the CFO said that 30 days, no, we won't. Not only did they stop it, they pulled the funding and they pulled the entire team, laid off. That's a pretty darn expensive thing, not just to the P&L, but the morale of everybody around that watched that happen, that watched leadership ignore the signals that there was something that required more conversation and more research. There will be a long time recovering from that. Now that's a big version of it, and there are hundreds of little versions of that that happen all day long. So there is a real cost to urgency that's not just in the P&L. And I think the last one is really important because in the case of that CFO, the mistake that he made, he could have recovered that team. In fact, I had a board director who had a real problem with a CEO, and there was a big error. And somebody on the board said to the chair, are you going to fire the guy? And he pushed his chair back. I watched this happen. It was really early on in my entrepreneurial work. And he looked at that board director and he said, are you kidding me? We just invested $240 million into this guy's education. I am not letting him go. And I thought, how wise, right? That CEO will never make that mistake again. And he just got the confidence vote from the chair. Stand up and fly right. There's some things you got to do differently, but you're still my guy. So the point here is that CFO could have said to that entire team, what are the lessons you're learning about how we got here when it's clear that it was known back there? And had them in a conversation about that, brought them into understanding where the system itself wasn't psychologically safe to accept bad news and act on it. It became personal instead of it just being bad news. Okay, so that's a problem to solve. Let's do that. So this dynamic interpersonally is what gets caught up. And when leaders try to hide mistakes or push them down or ignore them, they are not being authentic. I can tell you, having had one-on-one conversation with the guy in the $35 million problem, he knew it was a problem, but he couldn't stand the people at headquarters telling him what to do. So his team is a reflection of his leadership. They were ignoring the people who were signaling, hang on, slow down, we got to figure something out here. So what do we do about it? This is a little poem from a psychiatrist in Scotland. It's been around for 100 years. I can't believe how relevant it still is, so I'm sharing with you for that reason. The range of what we think and do is limited by what we fail to notice. Hopefully you hear it in the story I just told you. And because we fail to notice that we fail to notice, there's little we can do to change. And boy, isn't the environment changing, which means we need to change with it. But if we're not noticing that change is happening, we're really stuck. Until we notice how failing to notice shapes our thoughts and deeds. So we go back to the thing I said before. This habit space, if I'm attached to a certain way of leading and I choose to choose speed over thoughtfulness and deliberateness, and I'm not going to tell the truth about the impending layoff that's coming in 6 months, I guarantee you the team already knows. That disingenuousness is there energetically. And so what do we do about this? Here's 4 simple things to take away. Yeah, it's an acronym, just to help you to remember it. The first is to tune into the energy. You know when you walk into a room and your team is upset. What's the phrase we always say? You could cut the energy with a knife, right? Tune into that energy and don't ignore it. How many times have you sat through a meeting when you know there's something bugging people and nobody acknowledges it? Nothing gets done, no decision gets made, no forward progress occurs. If instead at the beginning of the meeting somebody had said, Let's take a moment and just connect and check in with each other. How are people doing with the announcement that got made last week? I can imagine it was a little unsettling. What's going on for everybody? That's the connection need in our human DNA. From that, we move very quickly to the business, but we don't think that's true. If I remember that they're whole, resourceful, capable, and creative, and that the energy in the room is about the situation, not the person, I'm going to create activation and commitment. So here's the next one. So there's the one that most leaders hate the most, embracing the silence. I'm going to stay silent for 3 seconds. Just notice your body. Did you see your foot start tapping? Right? This is what happens. Our body doesn't like silence. We're so conditioned to go, 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 go. I mean, it's not silent in this hall ever. Even when everybody leaves, it's not silent in here. However, if you have a tough subject to talk about, like how are people doing with the announcement from last week, and you don't leave silence, people don't get the access to the thing they're actually feeling because we've learned to shut it off. And you embrace silence, you make it safe for people to say, you know, truthfully, I couldn't figure out what it meant for me, so it's just a distraction. And somebody else will say, I get what it means to me, and I'm not happy about it, but I don't know who to talk to because there hasn't been any place to have the conversation. Now you've started the process of finding out what's really going on. This is what it means to ask before telling and listen to learn. Even in just those 2 comments, the leader realizes no business is going to get done until I address these concerns because they are foundational to whether this person feels like they want to be in this organization. So then the next one, ask generative questions, which is where we started this morning. If you do every question that starts with what, and you are making an invitation to that person to share with you how they see something. What are you focused on? What are you excited about? What contribution did you make last week that you're just absolutely stoked about? What's the challenge that you're embracing? What's the obstacle that you're navigating? All of these are very simple, open, generative questions you can't possibly know the answer to. They only live inside of your employee. And if you really want to scale and grow, you need to know what they're thinking to trust them to take the ball and run with it without you. At the end of the day, independent action is what you're looking for. Yes, with some thoughtfulness, but ultimately you're not going to give them the authority if you don't know that they're ready for it. All right. As you look at the 4 behaviors that are up here now, you have all 4 of these bad habits. These are thinking habits that close exchange. That warehouse manager who never looked up and never created any kind of relationship with his staff person, which one of those do you think he was in? I'm trying to fix this person to make them go away. If I don't look at them, maybe I won't have to do anything. Yeah. You know what? Okay, the first step is, can we be aware of the thinking habit that closes us down from being able to give our attention? Because I won't give my attention if I'm not actually creating an exchange. Whichever the dominant one is, I'm going to give you the antidote. Only fix one at a time, because all of you have 2, 3, some of us 4 or 5 decades of going and behaving in a certain way. We don't change that overnight just because we thought about it. It takes deliberateness. That's that reticular activating system. So 1, how many of you watch YouTubes? Okay, so if you're watching a 2-minute YouTube on a regular basis, I challenge you, or Instagram or TikTok, I challenge you to work with a 5-minute. If you're doing 5, go find a 10. If you're doing 20, go find an hour. Here's what I want you to do. Notice as you're watching when your attention floats away, when you're completely hijacked. That doesn't matter. What matters is, can you bring your attention back? That's the muscle you need to build. You're going to get distracted. Go back and watch it a second time and notice, oh, that's what the speaker was talking about that got me distracted. And that's going to tell you that there is something you are now noticing that's worthy of your attention. Go give it some food. Go give it attention, right? It's not that we get distracted, it's that we don't come back and stay with the speaker. All right, here's the next one. As I said about self-determination theory, what all employees want is the opportunity to achieve and grow. They don't always know how to ask for that. We say, well, they're so entitled, they all want training, they all want feedback, they all want to know what's going on. Well, that's being human. Without it, we're not really sure where to point ourselves. And we have a generation that has had so much access to information, but not so much access to relationship. They're a little bit awkward at it. And one of the things they need to know, where am I performing in a way that's useful and relevant? It's no skin off of our backs as a leader to be able to say, yes, I'm hearing what you're describing, and that is how that part of the process works. And there's another part of the process you don't know about, so let's spend a little time talking about that. So now I've done two things. I've acknowledged that they are aware and competent in one place, and I'm making myself available to do the growth that they're looking for. But as a leader, if I'm obsessed with speed, or I'm thinking somebody else is supposed to get them informed, I disconnect. And now you're going to start to see disengagement in meetings. That will ripple. So learning how to acknowledge behavior that's working. That's antidote 2. Antidote 3. The key word here is, what do they want? Now, if you're really good at being generative, you're going to ask that question. Somebody asks you, hey, can I have 10 minutes to talk about this project I'm working on? The next words out of your mouth need to be, what do you want by the end of the conversation? Cut through the stuff. Don't need the backstory, don't need the history. Tell me what it is you want by the end of our conversation. Or it might sound like, what would be a useful outcome from our conversation so you can move forward on this project? All right? In both cases, we're putting the ownership in the hands of the person. And then, when I hear what it is they want, now I can pay attention to say, okay, what I know about you, person, is that you have this in your experience and skill set. Where are you uncertain about using that with this initiative that you're bringing this question to me? Respect, confirmation of strengths, and you have authority to act. Those are 2 of the 3 things in the formula of belonging. When that person realizes that the boss sees them, recognizes their competency, and is completely behind them taking independent action, they start to believe it. If you have an environment where that isn't true uniformly, you're going to have to repeat this over and over and over again. But this is the antidote to what we're seeing in disengagement right now. Everybody got it? Did you pick one you want? All right. This is a little bit of a controversial subject, but you've probably all heard in the news this phrase pretty consistently. We need to hold people accountable. So here's my challenge to you. Do each of you here see yourselves as able to take account of your activities and choices? Yeah? Yeah? You're able to take account of your activities and choices. Do I have anything to do with that? Is there any influence I could exert on you to exercise your power of choice? No. No. What happens is when we are given authority to act and we don't fulfill the responsibility, there are consequences. Right? There are consequences. There can be good consequences because I did accept responsibility and I fulfilled it and I get rewarded for that. And we confuse those 2 things. So this is my definition of accountability: accepting responsibility for authority granted. And the problem that most leaders fall into is they delegate task, but not authority. So the person knows what they're expected to do, but they don't actually know if it's okay to do it. The gray area comes up. I don't know if we should sign this customer on or not. I don't really know what the criteria is for it. I don't know if I should write this check for this particular purchase order or not. We could go on with many examples. Delegation is super important. It is part of how you scale. But it's more important to delegate the authority than the task. Because what you want is to scale. That means you're inspiring independent action that you're confident about. So this question of accountability is super important. And a generative leader would ask the question, will you accept responsibility to lead this project over the next 6 months? Check in with me every 2 or 3 weeks when you've got challenges, and otherwise independently act so the organization gets the benefit of your competence. That's a generative request that completely authorizes them to operate independently, and that's what everybody wants. In the absence of that, you'll see attrition. This all settles in what I call the principle of sovereignty. You think about it, we all have conversations with ourselves. You might call it your strategist, maybe your alchemist, your mastermind, your project manager, but there's something inside of you that says, I know instinctively in my gut, intuitively in my heart what the right thing is to do next. And then you go to your mind and you rationalize it and you do your pitch deck and you run your financials. But the truth is, inside of us, we always have an inner authority that we listen to. And when we accept responsibility to make choices from that, we will always act out of our authenticity. When leaders do this, they will ask in a generative way, and they'll inspire that sovereignty in their teams. That's the work ahead. It doesn't happen just because you've sat here and listened to a talk. It happens because you choose to do it for yourself. So there's 3 steps to being culture by intention. The first is, what is the experience we want to be having at work? If you have frozen people who are not answering your invitation to explore something you're doing in your business, start with yourself. Find out, what do I want from them? What is the response I'm looking for? And then ask them, what do they want? How many of you have explored the question about what is excellence? Do you know? Have you? Great. That's fantastic. It's very rare. And have that conversation with your team, because each person will have their own definition of excellence. And when they hear each other's, they're going to realize, oh my gosh, there's so much more possible. And then ultimately, what do we have to believe in order to embody that? And that takes us back to the generative mindset, that we all already have everything necessary. We may not be accessing it and using it, but it's there. When we're invited, we remember and we bring it. In the wisdom of teams, Dr. Kazenbach said, you got to get the goal big enough for people to understand what's possible, and they will always rise to fulfill it. This is the principle. When you are in a generative mindset and you are clear about what you want people to accept responsibility for, and you give them the right authority, they will respond. Yes, culture is collective energy. I think that much like a marketing brand, and I said this at the very beginning, but some of you weren't here, you cannot force it. It is a reflection of how people experience. How do you experience yourself? How does your team experience you? How does your team experience the organization? How do customers experience the organization? How does the press, how do vendors experience the organization? I was in a Napa store the other day buying windshield wipers. And when I walked in the store, which I usually shop at regularly, there are 2 employees over on the left having a shouting match with each other. I'm like, well, that's interesting. And the store manager is behind the counter on the phone with a vendor having a very unhappy conversation. I turned around and walked out. I don't want to be in that energy. And that made me wonder, I wonder if the store manager knows how her energy is creating the space for this other energy to occur and what its ripple effect is. So these are subtle things. As a leader, we need to be more deliberate because we are the ones creating the collective energy. Now, truthfully, if you're exhausted, it ain't gonna happen. And it's important that you spend some time getting reconnected to your vision and ultimately reclaiming your authentic voice. Employees really appreciate knowing when something is up for you, not masking it. I certainly came out of the school of, my dad said, never let them see you sweat. And that was very true in my early work. I worked in the garment industry in New York. Oh my God, as a woman, that was just not a really easy thing to do. Then I went into financial services. That wasn't much better. I much prefer being an entrepreneur. And I finally had to learn that it was my vulnerability that had power. When my team could see what I was experiencing and thinking about and feeling, it gave permission for them to share that too. And together we had all of our brain power working on what we wanted to do next. So ultimately, choose a reset. It's up to you to decide how you're going to go about this transformation. Nobody can do it for you. Only you can do it for you. And at Invite Change, we believe that when you are authentic and generative in your leading, it fuels the courage necessary to change. You can decide to be a victim to it or be more deliberate and conscious and intentional and produce the experience that you know honors the interior of each of your team and ultimately yourself and the organization. We brought a couple of things to showcase today at the business show, yesterday and today. My colleague over here at the booth, Steve Thorson, and I. We have an asynchronous learning course that's about conversation made better, being generative. You got introduced to some of those skills today. It's all self-managed learning, 8 hours worth as a personal leadership journey. But I also think life goes better with a coach. And there's a 90-day product to productivity improvement. There's more beyond that that's available to you. I think that's all we have time for other than some questions. If you have any, I'm happy to answer them.
Yes. Hi.
Here, why don't you take the mic?
Good morning. My name is Martin. Martin Porter. I'm the owner of Black Company. We are embarking on film. So how do you talk about the experience of professionals and the authenticity?
Push your mic up a little.
The authenticity of myself in terms of engaging in the marketplace.
Yes.
My question is this. You said that there were two things that are in the DNA of everyone. The first one was being connected, I think.
Yeah, connection.
And then what was the other one?
Dr. Carl Rogers, in his humanistic psychology, brought this to us in the 60s, that every human being innately seeks to achieve and grow. And the way that we do that as human beings is connection. Maslow actually had step 4 in his hierarchy of needs is belonging, but what the data would tell us now is that's actually more important than our physiological needs. Think about what happens when a baby is born. The first thing we do is put them on a human body because that creates the security that I belong to something. And ultimately, this is what we're doing in the workplace by respecting someone's competency, giving them the autonomy to act, and then the third, confirm that what they contributed to the organization was in alignment with the purpose the organization is fulfilling. If you do those 3 things consistently, your employees will feel belonging. That goes a long way to satisfying what you need to do for engagement. Yeah, thank you. No? All right, so here's my closing question to see who gets a signed book. What's one idea you're taking away and how will you implement it? And I will select from the answer that I feel best about. Oh, move over here. I don't know why they're doing that. Yeah.
As you were discussing, I was thinking that I'm thinking of the conversations I've had with my staff and thinking how I touch that on a weekly basis, for example. So I thought there might be an opportunity for us to just recap over those pillars in terms of our purpose, our values. I mean, at a business level, but also at a closer to level.
Yeah. Good. You know, John Cotter, who is famous for the theory of leading change, said, transformation in an organization of any size and type is a 7-year journey. It's because of all that embedded habit we acquire in our bodies. And at 3 years, you're going to hate that you have to keep talking about it. You're going to be so bored. But if you don't keep talking about it, you're not going to get to year 7. Never underestimate the importance of keeping people connected to the North Star and helping them to see what's already contributing to getting towards that North Star and helping people speak to the things that they're concerned about. I don't know if we can do it. I do. I know you can do it.